Hey everyone, wow, that was such a nice intro. Thank you. Cool, hi everyone. Just want to say before we start, that was so nice, just like sitting with people and meeting new people. We were just talking about it, that it's been 2 years for me not meeting kind of like new people from other places and just kind of like connect, so it just feels really nice. And I want to say a big thank you to Colette and Alec and everyone that are organizing this, because it's such a great event, so thank you. Okay, and this is me. Hi, I'm Raz. I think the funny thing about this talk is that Colette kind of like messaged and she was like, I want you to come and kind of like give a talk here. It's a very sexy topic, planning. And I was like, planning, like what can I say about planning? I mean, yeah, you plan. But then after like a few minutes, just kind of like thinking about it, I was like, actually there's like a lot of things I want to say about planning. And a lot of it also relates to kind of like my personal history. So I've been at Spotify for about 2 years now, but my career all started with kind of like planning and tech in general 20 years ago when I started, when I learned this like magical language called HTML and kind of like started building websites to pay for undergrad back in the day. And being that kind of like freelancer, working with like different companies and kind of like understanding how to schedule my day-to-day and the projects was kind of like the start of that journey around planning. Later on, I started a few companies. So as an entrepreneur, you need to think about planning. Then I went into academia and I did a PhD, and obviously like a lot of planning when you write a PhD. I also started a line of queer dance parties in Pittsburgh, so some planning for that as well. So a lot of like different types of planning throughout my life. And I think primarily kind of like thinking about the space I'm in and doing innovation research for so many years, kind of like thinking ahead and planning is something that is imperative to the role and to the work. So let's start with just kind of like a question, and I want this to be conversational, so this is not kind of like me just like saying things and throwing it to the audience, but just kind of like thinking about planning and what comes to mind when you think about research planning. I know for like a lot of people that is kind of like the immediate kind of like picture that comes into mind. Probably like the second immediate picture that comes into mind is this. So all the templates, all the documents, all this kind of like ways to kind of like plan. But actually, today, I'm not really going to talk about that. What I am going to talk about is something else. There will be templates. We're not going to talk a lot about templates. There will be templates, so wait for it. It will get there. But before that, we're going to talk about Zoltar. And now I'm going to show my age, because Zoltar, how many people here remember Zoltar? Yes. So Zoltar is this, yes, of course. From the famous movie Big. So Zoltar is this kind of like fortune-telling machine in this movie. But before we go into Zoltar, I want to start with a personal story. Not long ago, April 2019, I worked for Facebook back then. I was kind of like the first researcher on Oculus, just after Facebook bought Oculus. And it was a pretty funny, kind of like interesting moment in time to join, because 2 weeks after I joined, Oculus released the first Oculus Rift with no research at all. Like, the only research they did was pretty much just kind of like making sure people don't get sick, which is an important part of like a product. But there was almost no user research conducted before releasing that product, which was amazing for me. And really, that was kind of like the moment where I started kind of like thinking about like, how do we think about growing and starting research culture in this company. As part of kind of like the different projects we worked on, one of the immediate things that came into mind was work, right? So we want to use people to use VR for work, and we want people to kind of like meet in VR because we know one of the really cool things about VR is that this like sense of presence, right? Once you put your headset on, you feel like you're there, and you can actually like see people around you and kind of like interact with them and feel like you're much closer than on a video call. I'm not sure if you had a chance to try it, but actually one of the teams I worked with back then just released Horizon Workrooms, which is kind of like the project we worked on for 5 years almost. A few months ago, and it's a really great product, but it's really kind of like that was the premise for like all that work around future of work and kind of like thinking about how to take meetings to the next level in VR. It was funny because at that moment, the research culture at Oculus was very nascent. And when you talk to people about research, the first thing was, oh, we need to like test hand gestures. We need to test kind of like screen sharing. We need to do all these kind of like understanding interactions. But actually, one of the things that I wanted to ask is actually, what is the future of work? So how do we take kind of like a step back? And yes, we have like all these like interesting, important things around like picking up a pen. But there's another question, which is just in general, what is the future of work, and how does this product fit into that vision? So that was kind of like the project, or the question. I assembled a group of people from around the company that were also interested in it. We did this kind of like research sprint, and we collected all this like secondary research. We didn't do any kind of like new research. It was all based on kind of like research we've done in the company or outside, and we put together this perspective. We published it in December 2019, and when we published it, crickets, nothing. Like, we used Facebook, there's Workplace, which is like the internal Facebook for work. We published it on Workplace. We got like 2 likes. That was the extent of the reach of that note. But we believed in it. We were like, this is actually something really important, something really interesting. Fast forward 3 months, and we all know what happened in the beginning of 2020. All of us started wearing masks, and we still are. But also what happened is that remote work became everywhere. And all of us suddenly faced this kind of like future that we wrote about just a few months ago. But back then, 3 months ago, like no one cared about it. And at that point, our research was shared by Zuck to the entire company, right? So that note that like no one read was suddenly read by the entire company. So that was really kind of like a journey from 0 impact to hashtag all the impact, right? Like, you cannot plan it, and actually a disclaimer, I did not have any part in organizing a pandemic just to drive the research. But what was interesting is that this future that we imagined, or the future that we envisioned as part of this research work, arrived earlier than we expected. Okay, back to Zoltar. One of the kind of like mantras to everyone that joins my team is that the best researchers I worked with know how to tell the future. And I think this is like something I would really like to kind of like stop and kind of like really focus on, because telling the future as part of our practice is something that we don't talk about a lot. And I'm going to cover this in a little bit, but this kind of like envisioning the future is a very big part of our role as researchers. These people that, these best researchers I worked with, and they already started kind of like envisioning and understanding what's going to happen, they already started working on it, right? They already know what they need to do. They already started kind of like doing the research, and they plan ahead 6 months or a year from now. And you can ask yourself, okay, I don't work in-house, I don't have a team, what does it mean to be a vendor? It means the same thing. Like as a vendor, part of your role also is not only kind of like answering immediate kind of like questions that you get from your client, but also how do you bring yourself to do this kind of like more proactive, future-thinking work that will inform your client. So these people already started work on it. And when you think about how Zoltar is related to planning, is that when you plan, I really encourage you to try and imagine the future. Try and put yourself in the shoes of the product you're working on in 6 months from now, a year from now, or more. And kind of like predicting this future really helps you focus not on what is directly in front of you, right? I think like the obvious thing is like when we have these conversations around like what should we work on, then the main things you get from your stakeholders is like, oh, we need like this in the next 2 weeks, or we need this in like the next 2 months. In kind of like in the best case scenario, right? Like it's, oh, like we'll need this in like 3 months from now, and you're like, oh my goodness, I have so much time. Like, but actually, let's not focus on those kind of like immediate direct things that are in front of us, but look more into the future. What's interesting is that once we do that shift, and once we are kind of like reconfiguring our role as researchers, we're also shifting the dynamic between us and the people we work with. So moving from a service organization, or a service team, or a service function, where we only get requests, and we kind of like push back the results, we're now strategic partners, because we bring our perspective to the discussion. We're not only answering what people are asking us to answer, but we are challenging our team to think about something that is future, that is coming. We bring our own perspective to that moment. And that's a huge shift in how we think about ourselves in this kind of like research practice. And we talk a lot about impact and what kind of impact the work has, and this drove kind of like X number of users, and this drove X number of revenue. But when you do this kind of future-looking work, the impact from that is tenfold. So you can kind of like hear me and say, this is really cool, this is very inspiring, you talk about the future, you talk about us kind of like thinking about the future, but there's like real life, right? How do you manage that? How do you kind of like create this thing? Because having the time to do proactive work is not easy. We have so many kind of like requests coming in, and they never stop, right? It's like ongoing, like every time there's more and more, and then there's like these emergencies, and now like, oh, we need to like release this product, and we need like super fast, scrappy research to do a thing, right? There's always these things. How do you make space and time for proactive research? We get so much pressure about the next few weeks, right? How many people here were like, oh, we need this in like 2 weeks? Everyone, right? But I think that the thing is that our teams, in many cases, they don't understand that our timelines are different. Designers, engineers, product managers, in many cases, they can do pivots. They can kind of like design a new thing. Yes, it takes time. It takes time to develop things. Our timelines as researchers are different. And in many cases, our peers, they don't understand that. And we need to educate them, and we need to let them know that, when we do take on research projects, it's not from today to tomorrow, right? Research takes time. As part of our role as researchers, we need to also not only do the research, but also reflect about the research and come back with something meaningful that we want to say as part of the research. And that takes time. So yeah, running research takes time. And the last thing you want to do is to deliver research after a decision is already made. And that happened to me so many times in my career, where I was like, okay, yes, I'll do this research. And then I ran this research, and then I came back with the results, and then the team was like, cool. Yeah, we already made that decision 3 days ago, so. And that happens all the time. And just imagine how much effort and how many resources, not only actual money resources, but just time, your time, and your mental time and physical time, and just kind of doing research that has no impact, that once you deliver it, the team already made a decision, right? So how do we create space for fortune telling in our work? How do we break this chain of reactive work? How many people here feel that they're part of that chain? Yes. It's pretty common as part of our role. And I think part of it, and I was talking to some people here before, is that our role historically was more of a supportive role, right? Still, there are companies, places where research is a service. And at the end of the day, we want, in many cases, to please our stakeholders. As researchers, we try to please people, we try to kind of help people, and it's really hard for us to disappoint people. And when we say no to requests, that's such a bad feeling, right? Because, Justin talked about kind of creating relationships and connections with our stakeholders. And a lot of that trust and relationship and connection is based on friendships. And, actually liking the people you work with and kind of creating this strong connection. And then suddenly, you get to a point where you need to say, you need to tell them no, right? No, I can't do it, or I don't think this is the right thing to do. And that's really, really difficult for us as a research function. Okay. So when we do think about breaking the cycle, there are a few things that, just based on my kind of experience, I wanted to share today as things that help. There are many different recipes, many different ways to approach this. I encourage you to choose your own adventure. This is just a recommendation. But these are some of the things that helped me and my team throughout the career. And let's start with imagination. As I said before, I don't feel like there's enough space for us to imagine as part of our role. So really kind of taking a step back and visualizing what is going to happen next for our products. You need a lot of context for that. You need to understand not only what the product is, what's happening with your product, but also what's happening in the industry, in competitors. But what's interesting about this moment of imagination is that once you do it and you get to that vision and you get to that perspective, you're pretty much the only one on the team that did that. Because your product manager, your designer, your engineer, they're probably just focused on delivering, right? And we have that opportunity to come in and bring that perspective to inspire the team and to think beyond kind of the immediate few weeks or few months. Let's just think about an example, right? So this is something that, obviously, I have very low knowledge about, which is ride-sharing apps. But just for this case, let's think about, let's say you work for one of the ride-sharing apps. And you're focused on delivering, the best experience. And then you read on The Guardian that the price of petrol makes the biggest jump in 17 years. As a researcher, the first thing is to ask yourself, what does it mean for my product? So this is happening right now. How will it impact the product in 6 months from now? How will it impact the product in a year from now? And start having those conversations and thinking sessions and imagination and collecting that kind of like space for you to kind of like bring that perspective to the team. Because I'm sure that like Uber or Lyft or everyone are already like thinking about it, but us as researchers bringing a very kind of like grounded, holistic perspective about what does that mean for the immediate product is something that is very special for us. Okay, so that's just an example. And you need to ask yourself, what will be the impact of the work when you do this kind of like imagination? As I said before, one of the main things that we want to do as a function, as a research function, is help the team. We want to build the best product. We want to help people get delight from products. We want people to kind of like have the best experience, which means that in many cases, many times, we find it really hard to say no to things, right? Which leads me to prioritization. And this is actually, at Facebook, there's like a lot of like propaganda on the walls, right? There's like a lot of kind of like, be open. But this is actually one of the posters that I really like because it says it isn't prioritization until it hurts. And what's nice about this thing is that it really encapsulates this thing that I see again and again with like people on my team and in kind of like just having conversations with you all, is that people say things like, oh yeah, like I prioritize this. Or, like, yeah, I had the conversations and I chose to work on this. But actually, none of that was saying no to work. We have this tendency to just say yes to everything and just kind of like, at the end of the day, compromise our physical health, compromise our mental health, feeling like we're not delivering enough, feeling that we don't have time. And the thing is that we need to teach our teams and our stakeholders that when we prioritize, part of like prioritizing is actually saying no to things. And part of prioritizing is disappointing people. And we need to like be okay with that. And I can tell you that like it's still hard for me, right? My team, like they say no to things, and then people like my peers, they come to me and they're like, why did you say no to things? Like, and I still find it hard because I want to help, I want to support. But again, if we think about things like the well-being of the team, or kind of like the rigor of the work, like being really like thoughtful about what we deliver, if we don't prioritize and actually say no to things, that's never going to happen. So one of the things I always tell my team and everyone that joins kind of my team is that it's okay and actually expected for you to say no to things. I know that like from a vendor perspective, you probably don't want to say no to things because that's your livelihood. But there's still, I'm sure, kind of like an aspect of prioritization in the work and understanding what you need to do and what you don't need to do. And what's also interesting is that as you become more and more senior, as a researcher, you get more comfortable saying no to things. You get more comfortable explaining why you're saying no to things. You get comfortable in kind of like understanding that if you're going to say no now, actually you'll deliver much more impact if you do this other thing. One of my star team members, Julia, she put together this amazing piece of work around prioritizing. And this framework is called U-Star, and again, this is just something that we made internally for our team. Feel free to take it, feel free to change it, feel free to kind of like use whatever prioritization framework you want. But primarily it looks at these kind of like 5 different dimensions: the unknown, the scalability, the timeline, alignment, and the risk. So when we talk about unknown, we ask ourselves, what is the level of unknown? Is this a new area of exploration? The research team should aim to uncover unknowns and not repeat existing data or repeating insights. You probably saw in your career and your experience people redoing the same research again and again. And again, you see the same results, and you're like, yes, we know this already. Yeah. You can just look back at kind of like the literature from a year ago or 2 years ago, and it's pretty much the same thing. I'm not saying you never repeat research. When there are cultural changes, when there are kind of like things that have happened since kind of like the first time you did research, you should definitely kind of like revisit that. But there's a lot of instances where I just see teams doing the same research again and again. The second thing is scalability. So what is the potential for learnings to be applied beyond the immediate working group? Potential for the insights to continue serving us long term. I think a really great example is this kind of like work that this data scientist on my team did, and she just kind of like published it a few weeks ago. And it just started from like thinking immediately just on the product she's working on. But as she kind of like went into that kind of like research and kind of like pulled in more and more people from like other teams, suddenly it became clear to her that this project will touch so many other teams and will impact so many other products than her immediate work and immediate product. Third one is timeline. So when are the insights needed? What is the urgency level? What are the dependencies, the readiness of the team? Next one is alignment. How does this project support or enable your team's goals? And the last one is risk. Is this something we need to de-risk? If we don't do this, what's the perceived risk to end users and to the company? And there's actually a nice 2x2. We love them. That might help you. Again, this is all suggestions. But this is one way of how we think about kind of like planning when we go into planning season. As a team, we come together and we start plotting our projects or the project requests or ideas on this kind of like 2x2. So what I want to do now, it's audience participation. Are you guys excited? Yes. Let's take a few moments and start, and maybe, you know, just kind of like write down a few projects that we're now in Q3 planning. Just, you know, for the next kind of like 2-3 months, where would you put your projects on this kind of like 2x2? So let's take, 2 minutes. Okay, time's up. You can continue this later if you want. And now, I would love to hear from you, looking at this kind of like beautiful visualization that you made. What are kind of like things that you see there?
See that have things that are right in the top right and things that are quite low in the bottom left. You know, depending on the scale of what the project is. You know.
Cool. So yeah, clustering around like different areas. Is it kind of like what you expected it to be, or clustered around, or not? Expected. Good.
It was a good exercise because my first reaction was that everything is high risk and strategic. Like, I was thinking about a couple different projects. I was like, oh, we absolutely have to do that. And then I kind of forced myself to force rank them and realized that that's not actually true. So it was a good, like, quick thought exercise.
Thank you.
Thank you. I feel that it's interesting to position between strategic and tactical, because sometimes I wish it was more strategic, but given the timeline, it's made to be tactical. So it's somehow in between depending on how I want to frame it or how I want to sell it.
Yeah. Definitely. And I can give a plug to a Medium article I wrote that actually says that tactical can also be strategic, but that's a different talk. Okay. Cool. I think it's a fun exercise, and it just like helps us think through kind of like our projects and where we kind of like spend our time and how do we kind of like allocate resources. And then the last thing, so we said the first thing is imagination, second thing is prioritization, and third thing is inclusion and alignment. And we are not working in a silo. There's people that we work with, and they also care about our work and they want to be part of it. And the last thing you want is to plan research and come back to your team and you're like, ta-da, research plan. And they're like, where does this come from? What? So when we do plan at Spotify on my team, there's a huge emphasis on including everyone from all the different disciplines in the process. Which means that when we start planning, we reach out to all our partners and we kind of like have those conversations around like, what are your questions? What do you think we should do? And we make sure that they not only feel heard, but actually heard. And they are part of the conversation. Later on, we kind of like go in, and I'm going to talk about it when we go into the templates. But there's another kind of like point in time where once we kind of like do kind of like come up with our list of what we should work on, that's not the end. That's when we kind of like share that with the team as a draft. And we tell them, this is what we're thinking, what do you think? And we have that conversation. Historically, it turned out to be really, really important because we would get, again and again, designers, product managers, engineers, just kind of like, oh, I feel completely blindsided by your plan. I didn't know about this. Why didn't you think about question X, right? And when they're there, throughout the entire process of planning, there's no surprises, right? Because when we get to the end, they're like, yeah, like I remember a few weeks ago, we talked about this, and now I see it in the document, so that's good. So I can't emphasize enough the importance about bringing your peers and getting their buy-in to conflict the work as you plan. Not to say that it's easy. In many times during that kind of like time period, then people start questioning your own, proactive research, or like, why are you working on this and not on that? But the earlier you have those conversations, the earlier you have those kind of like discussions, the better. And that's really kind of like where you need to bring yourself as a researcher to educate and explain and kind of like help the other disciplines visualize what will happen with that research. Because I think like we, as researchers, we're really good to at kind of like understanding what will happen. We're like, yeah, we're going to do this research, and then this will be the results, and then this will happen. But our partners, they're not us, and they come from a different background. And for them, it's really hard to understand what will be the end product of the research and how it will impact the product and their work. But that's not all, right? So we talked about the work, we talked about the products, but what about you as an individual, as a researcher, as a person? We also want to make sure that we plan for personal growth, which is like pretty much the last thing we plan for. Whenever I ask my team to like share their plans with me, there's always nowhere like some kind of like a personal growth. and as part of that, because again, we want to say yes to everything. We want to do all the research, and we don't make time for our own personal growth, which is sad. So figuring out what to work on is challenging, but having a process in place to manage that, the complexity, will really help you maximize not only the impact of the work, but also how you grow as a researcher. And I think, you know, there's this kind of like belief that if you do the work and if you kind of like go through kind of like all the, you know, challenges, you grow and you learn, and it's true, you do, but if you, in addition to the work, you also carve time for your own personal development and you go to conferences like you're doing today, which is great. Or you kind of like learn a new method, or you, any other kind of like personal growth goal that you have and you build it into the plan. Historically, or kind of like from my experience, I saw that helped people really kind of like up-level themselves as researchers. And as a manager, a successful planning process is one that really creates this visibility and alignment to our research work across all our stakeholders. And at the end of the day, gets my team excited about the months ahead. Because you don't want to get to a point where you're like, planning, okay, it's done. And now I need to do the work. And like, you know, there's zero like energy or excitement. So how do you create that excitement as a manager and you get the people to actually look forward to the next few months of the projects? And I promised templates, and here we are, the templates section. How excited are you? I know. We love templates. We do love templates. Okay, here we go. First one. So, as I said, we have this process. This is a process that we put together with, what's nice about Spotify is that we have agile coaches that we work with, and they help us to kind of like think through processes and kind of like what's the right thing, what's the wrong thing, about, and learning from other disciplines as well. So this is a process we put together with this agile coach. The other disclaimer I want to say is that like Spotify, when we think about kind of like insights work, we have an insights function. So the insights function includes both data scientists and user researchers together under one umbrella. I know in other companies, user research reports to design, data science reports to marketing or growth. So in this example, you'll see that user research and data science are together. But again, you can take this and make it your own, whatever kind of like structure works for you. This is just an example. Okay, so this is kind of like the template for request ideas, initiatives, and this is really where we start. As I said before, it's really about like reaching out to your peers, to your stakeholders, getting their kind of like requests, ideas, what they think we should work on. But this is also kind of like the time where you kind of like think about or start doing this kind of like imagination moment in time. And really kind of like write down everything. And this is not only like the immediate thing that comes into mind, but also like things, you know, that like 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now. This is where you kind of like collect all those ideas. Obviously, COVID happened, and a lot of our planning went remote. So we started using Mural, but you can think about like any other online whiteboard thing as a space for the team to kind of like come together and ensure alignment between all of us. So, as I said, on my team, there's both user researchers and data scientists. We work in London, in Stockholm, in New York, so multiple locations, multiple disciplines. Bringing everyone on the same page is really, really important. So we created this mural, and again, I'm going to share everything in the end. You're going to have access to all the templates to kind of like bring us together and to think about all the different work streams we have and put together the questions there. What happens in these sessions is that each one of the people on the team, walks through their questions that are relevant for them, and then gets feedback from everyone else on the team. So it's a very collaborative process. One other thing that I didn't mention here is that we introduced this kind of like pilot, co-pilot approach to work, which I highly recommend. It's one of the best things that happened to my team. And primarily, it's an idea that we stole from engineering. But the idea is that every insights person on my team is a pilot on a work stream or a squad or a team or whatever. And they're kind of like the people that are part of that team. You can think about them as like kind of embed in that team, but they kind of like relay back everything to the insights team as a whole. But then, in addition to a pilot, we also have co-pilots. So every pilot can be a co-pilot on another work stream, right? So what's cool about that is that in that case, you don't only have your immediate team that you support, but you also have this kind of like other researcher or data scientist that you work with on something else. Highly recommend it. People love it. Creates a lot of like great discussions, a lot of collaboration. If you have the resources, if you have the opportunity to create this kind of like pilot, co-pilot approach, do it. Okay, so then in this session, each one of the pilots go through kind of like the work stream, and they talk to kind of like what's the questions, what they heard from the team, what their own reflections, and then we start to kind of like cluster it. Next up is this kind of like timeline overview. And this is really about visualizing all the work together to get a bird's eye view of what are the busy periods, when certain people might be spread too thin or are unavailable. And these are the moments where you kind of like start to understand, oh shit, like I can't do this project, right? Like these are the moments where you see in a very visual way that people can just not do the work and you need to like say no to things. And then once we do that, and once we kind of like cluster and create this kind of like list of projects, we create this one-slide project proposal thing. So this is really about kind of like starting to communicate back to the teams we work with, what do we have in mind? So what are research questions? What is the impact? Who's the teams going to work on that? What's the method? Stakeholders, timeline, resources, all of that as part of this template. And then we have this deck that just like outlines all the projects that we are proposing. And then this kind of like work stream overview. So per kind of like every work stream, what are all the different projects the team is going to work on? All of these templates, all of this kind of like visualization, at the end of the day, is made just to do one thing. And that is that kind of like last thing around like alignment and communication and visibility and transparency and buy-in that is super, super, super important. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get your stakeholders to see and understand what you're going to do before you do it. But also, how will you know how much work you can do, right? So we looked at kind of like the timelines, but then there's also the personal part. So part of planning, you should also think about yourself and capacity. And we're not machines. We don't work 24/7. We have limited capacity of things that we can do. And it's funny how many times people just don't think about it. Because if you actually like go through the days and the calendar and you like, actually calculate the number of hours, you can look at like, oh, there's this number of capacity that I can do, and we never do it. I mean, if someone here does that, that's amazing. I love you, but most people don't. So Cami on my team made this template, which is amazing. Which is really kind of like a way for you to visualize your capacity. And what's cool about this is that it kind of like helps you allocate all the different kind of like projects, but also take in consideration things like vacation, public holidays, all these things that are always, you know, like you remember after you already made the plan. And when you do this capacity planning, you really need to think about the kind of like scale between growth and impact. We talked about personal growth. We talked about carving time for personal growth. How do you make sure that when you do this capacity planning, you think about not only kind of like the impact, but also your personal growth? So first thing is to establish your available capacity. And although we all have the same number of days in a time period, there may not all be working days. There's always vacations. There's always, you know, internal conferences or any other kind of like hack weeks. Every company is different. Second thing, you allocate the learning and development goals. Again, super important. Things like conferences, participating in hack weeks, writing feedback, self-assessment. We have every 6 months, you know, performance evaluation, development chat. So every 6 months you need to like make time to write all these things. And also mentoring, right? Like we're not working in a silo. We want to help people around us be better and elevate them as well, not us, only us. How do you make time to kind of like elevate all the people around you as well? This is a big one. We never think about admin. Never. How do you account for admin? I know it's boring, but it's admin, and it happens. Like all of us have it. We need to think about it. We need to talk about admin. Email, Slack, updates, check-ins, expense reports, all these things take time, and we're just kind of like, many times just ignore them. And then the remaining work, the remaining time is actually the work, right? So I think what's nice about this is it actually helps you to visualize that and see how much time you have to actually do the work. So when we think about capacity planning recommendations, you need to really pair the timeline for a full view of the overall capacity and how the capacity is distributed over the quarter. This is kind of like a tip: increase your admin % of time if you're frequently context switching between different projects. It takes more time to read things and answer. And then completing this capacity planning as a team adds a lot of transparency, and you get a sense of like how much capacity people have, when people are away, and really kind of like help to kind of like also as a manager identify any gaps or places where I need to hire and get more resources and more help. All of this work is giants on my team that I love, Julia and Cami and Philip, so I just want to give them a big shout out because they're awesome. And here we go. All the templates are now available at this tiny URL. So feel free to, visit, make copies, and I think the other thing is, like I said it before, planning is personal. Everyone, you have your own style, and that's fine. So take these templates, make them your own, and enjoy, and share back with the community, because sharing is caring. Okay, closing words. I want to take us back to the beginning and really think about the fact that if we only focus on the immediate asks from the team, our impact will always be limited. It's sad to say, but we will always play catch up. There are always going to be more requests. There's always going to be more kind of like things, fires that you need to. There are always going to be these things, and we will always play this catch-up role. And that's not healthy. So as we go into Q3 planning, at this moment in time, I encourage you all to be brave. And when I say brave, I mean really think about your role, not only as kind of like helping the team and providing answers and kind of like supporting, but actually being a strategic partner. Someone that comes into the conversation about the product and where the product should head from a data-grounded perspective, from a visionary perspective, from a place where someone that already thought about the future and thought about all the consequences on all the places the product is going to go, and bring that kind of like braveness with you. Break the chain of reactive research and pick not only the immediate work that is in front of you. And just kind of like, let's ask ourselves, what if we all were a little bit more like Zoltar, right? Imagine how our companies will change. And this change will not only reshape our products, but also our role as a discipline, and position us to be strategic partners, which is exactly where we want to be. Thank you.